Welcome to the History AI podcast, where the past comes alive with facts, anecdotes, and a dash of humor. Here are your hosts, Chuck and Marco.
Welcome to the History AI podcast, where we dive into the past to uncover the stories that shaped our world. I'm Chuck.
And I'm Marco. Today, we're unraveling a tale that sounds like it's straight out of a spy novel, complete with secret agents, high-stakes missions, and rocket scientists. We're talking about Operation Paperclip.
That's right, Marco. But before we jump into the operation itself, let's set the scene. Picture this, it's 1945, the end of World War II. The Allies have just defeated Nazi Germany, and the world is coming to grips with the sheer scale of the atrocities committed during the war. Europe is in shambles, cities are leveled, and millions are displaced.
The Cold War is just beginning to heat up. The United States and the Soviet Union, once uneasy allies, are now positioning themselves as the dominant superpowers. It's a bit like two kids eyeing the last piece of cake, except this cake is global supremacy.
That's a pretty intense cake, Marco. And in this scramble for power, both nations are racing to capture as much of Germany's advanced technology and expertise as they can. We're talking about rockets, jet engines, chemical weapons, the works.
Exactly. And amid this scramble, the US comes up with Operation Paperclip. The mission? To bring over as many German scientists as possible, especially those who had been working on cutting-edge technology. The goal was to leverage their knowledge to gain an edge over the Soviets.
So, who are these scientists? Imagine a real-life version of Doc Brown from Back to the Future, but without the DeLorean. The most famous among them was Wernher von Braun. He and his team had developed the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It was a terrifyingly effective weapon during the war.
Von Braun would later become a key figure in the US space program, helping to develop the rockets that would eventually take America to the moon. Talk about a career change from Nazi Germany to NASA.
But it wasn't just about rockets. The operation included experts in all sorts of fields: medicine, engineering, physics. These scientists were seen as vital assets in the emerging Cold War. And trust me, the US wasn't about to let the Soviets snag them.
Right, because if there's one thing worse than a Cold War, it's losing it because your enemy has all the rocket scientists. So, Operation Paperclip was launched, and over 1,600 German scientists and their families were brought to the United States.
Now, we'll dive into the nitty-gritty of this operation, what led to it, who was involved, the objectives, and the controversies. Plus, we'll explore the lasting impact of Operation Paperclip on science, ethics, and international relations.
And we promise to keep it engaging. After all, history is full of stories, and we're here to tell them. Ready, Chuck?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. So, what exactly was Operation Paperclip? The main objective was to recruit German scientists and engineers who had been working on advanced weapons projects, particularly those involved in rocketry, aerodynamics, and chemical warfare. The goal was clear: leverage their expertise to ensure the United States stayed ahead of the Soviet Union in technological advancements.
Let's break it down. The United States was particularly interested in the V-2 rocket program, which had been developed by Wernher von Braun and his team. The V-2 was a game-changer. It was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, capable of delivering a 1-ton warhead to London from launch sites in Germany. This kind of technology was invaluable in the nascent Cold War era.
Wernher von Braun is probably the most famous name associated with Operation Paperclip. Born in 1912, he was a rocket engineer and space architect. During World War II, he worked on the V-2 rocket project at the Piedmont Army Research Center. Despite his membership in the Nazi Party and the SS, his expertise made him an invaluable asset to the United States.
Von Braun and his team were brought to the US under Operation Paperclip, and they played a pivotal role in the development of the American space program. Von Braun eventually became a key figure at NASA, where he led the development of the Saturn V rocket, which powered the Apollo missions to the moon.
But it wasn't just von Braun. Kurt Debus, another key figure, became the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Debus had been a member of the Nazi Party and an SS officer, but his technical expertise in rocket technology was unparalleled. Under his leadership, the Kennedy Space Center became the launch site for numerous space missions, including Apollo 11.
Hubertus Strughold, often called the father of space medicine, was another significant recruit. Strughold's work focused on the medical challenges of human spaceflight. However, his past involvement in unethical medical experiments during the war cast a long shadow over his contributions.
The operation was orchestrated by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, a subcommittee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This agency worked closely with the U.S. Army and the newly formed CIA to identify and recruit German scientists. Their task was to sift through the backgrounds of these scientists, downplaying or obscuring their Nazi affiliations when necessary to facilitate their immigration to the United States.
The objectives of Operation Paperclip extended beyond just rocketry. The U.S. was also interested in advancements in aerodynamics, jet propulsion, and chemical warfare. Scientists like Alexander Lippisch, who worked on delta-winged aircraft designs, and Fritz Haber, a chemist known for his work on gas warfare, were among those recruited.
The rationale was straightforward. These scientists had knowledge and skills that could give the U.S. a significant advantage. Whether it was developing better jet engines, understanding high-speed aerodynamics, or creating new chemical processes, their expertise was seen as crucial for both military and civilian advancements.
However, this wasn't without its ethical dilemmas. Many of these scientists had been deeply involved in the Nazi war machine. Their work had often been conducted under horrific conditions, sometimes involving forced labor and unethical human experimentation.
Despite these concerns, the U.S. government decided that the potential benefits outweighed the moral costs. The Cold War mentality of win at all costs often overshadowed ethical considerations. This led to a complex legacy for Operation Paperclip, one that includes both incredible technological advancements and troubling moral compromises.
And this complexity is exactly what makes Operation Paperclip such a fascinating and controversial chapter in history. It's a story of innovation, ethics, and the stark realities of a world emerging from the horrors of war into a new geopolitical struggle.
Alright, let's dive into the timeline and key events of Operation Paperclip. The story begins in the chaotic final days of World War II. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered to the Allies, marking the end of the war in Europe. But the race to capture German technology and expertise was just beginning.
Picture this: American, British, and Soviet forces were scrambling through Germany like kids on an Easter egg hunt, except instead of colored eggs, they were looking for rocket scientists and top-secret documents. Talk about a high-stakes scavenger hunt.
One of the first major events was the capture of the V-2 rocket production facilities at Peenemünde. The U.S. Army's 1st Armored Division managed to seize these facilities in April 1945. This was a major coup because Peenemünde was where Wernher von Braun and his team had developed the V-2 rockets that terrorized London.
Von Braun and his team were smart cookies. They knew the end was near and decided to surrender to the Americans, believing they'd have better opportunities, and, let's face it, a better quality of life than under Soviet rule. So, they packed up their blueprints and prototypes and made their way to the American lines.
Smart move on their part. By June 1945, the initial phase of what would become Operation Paperclip was launched under the code name Operation Overcast. The goal was to bring these scientists to the U.S. as quickly as possible. But the project's name change to Paperclip came about in a rather mundane way. The documents of the scientists deemed important were marked with a paperclip. Not quite the dramatic flair you might expect.
Imagine being the guy who came up with that. What should we call this top-secret operation? How about Paperclip?
Bureaucracy at its finest, Marco. Anyway, by the end of 1945, about 1,600 scientists and their families were transported to the United States. They were settled in various military installations, with Fort Bliss in Texas and White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico being 2 key locations. Here, they were tasked with continuing their research and developing new technologies for the U.S. military.
It wasn't all smooth sailing, though. There was significant resistance within the U.S. government. The State Department, among others, was concerned about the ethical implications of bringing former Nazis to America. They tried to block visas for certain scientists, But the JIOA often found ways around these obstacles, sometimes by outright falsifying records. You know, just your average day of bending the truth in the name of national security.
As the Cold War intensified, the urgency to capitalize on these scientists' expertise grew. In 1946, Operation Paperclip officially began, expanding its scope to include experts in fields like aerodynamics, chemistry, and medicine. The U.S. was determined to outpace the Soviets in every technological domain.
A key milestone occurred in 1949 when Wernher von Braun and his team were transferred to Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. There, they worked on developing the Redstone missile, which became the United States' first large ballistic missile. This project was critical in establishing the U.S. as a dominant force in missile technology.
Fast forward to the late 1950s, and von Braun's work culminated in the launch of Explorer 1, the first successful American satellite, in 1958. This marked the beginning of the U.S. space program and set the stage for the Apollo missions. It's like going from riding a tricycle to piloting a jet, quite the leap.
Meanwhile, other scientists brought over through Operation Paperclip were making significant strides in various fields. Kurt Debus was working on launching systems that would be used at Cape Canaveral, and Hubertus Strughold was pioneering research in space medicine, albeit with a controversial past that would haunt his legacy.
Despite the technological achievements, Operation Paperclip was not without its ethical and moral dilemmas. Many of these scientists had direct ties to the Nazi regime and had participated in some of its most heinous acts. Balancing the desire for technological superiority with moral integrity was a tightrope walk that the U.S. navigated with varying degrees of success.
It's like adopting a pet tiger. Sure, it's impressive and can scare off your enemies, but there's always the risk it might bite you back.
That's a colorful way to put it, Marco. Now, let's dive into the experiments and ethical dilemmas that were part and parcel of Operation Paperclip. The scientists brought over were not just idle minds, they were put to work immediately, tasked with advancing U.S. technology in several critical fields.
First up, we have rocketry. Wernher von Braun and his team were moved to Fort Bliss, Texas, and later to Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. Their work primarily focused on developing the Redstone missile, which became the first large American ballistic missile. This missile was pivotal in both the early space race and in military applications.
Von Braun's team also contributed to the development of the Jupiter C rocket, which launched the first successful American satellite, Explorer 1, in 1958. This was a massive leap for the U.S. space program and marked the beginning of America's serious efforts to compete with the Soviet Union in space exploration.
Beyond rocketry, there was significant work in aerodynamics and jet propulsion. Alexander Lippisch, for instance, was an expert in delta-wing aircraft designs. His work laid the groundwork for modern fighter jets and other high-speed aircraft. He contributed to the development of the Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, an interceptor aircraft that served during the Cold War.
Meanwhile, in the realm of chemical warfare, scientists like Fritz Haber were brought over. Haber, who had developed chemical weapons during World War I, provided valuable insights into both offensive and defensive measures in chemical warfare. His expertise was seen as essential in an era where chemical weapons were a looming threat.
One of the most controversial figures was Hubertus Strughold, often called the father of space medicine. Strughold's research was crucial in understanding the physiological challenges of space travel. His work included studying the effects of extreme environment on the human body, which was vital for manned space missions.
However, Strughold's past involvement in Nazi human experiments cast a long shadow over his achievements. During the war, he had been implicated in experiments conducted on concentration camp prisoners. These experiments included exposing inmates to extreme cold and low-pressure conditions to simulate high-altitude flight. The ethical implications of his actions were deeply troubling.
This brings us to the heart of the ethical dilemmas associated with Operation Paperclip. Many of these scientists had been members of the Nazi Party and had participated in or been complicit in war crimes. Their work during the war often involved forced labor, inhumane experiments, and direct contributions to the Nazi war machine.
The U.S. government faced a significant moral quandary, the choice between prosecuting these individuals for their war crimes or utilizing their expertise to gain an edge in the Cold War. In many cases, The decision was made to prioritize technological advancement over justice.
The Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, which orchestrated Operation Paperclip, often downplayed or outright falsified the backgrounds of these scientists to facilitate their immigration. Documents were altered to omit Nazi affiliations, and the scientists' pasts were whitewashed to make them more palatable to the American public and government officials.
One particularly egregious example was Arthur Rudolph, who had been a key figure in the Middlework V2 rocket factory, where thousands of forced laborers died under brutal conditions. Despite this, Rudolph was brought to the U.S. and played a significant role in developing the Saturn V rocket for NASA.
These actions led to significant resistance and controversy. Human rights groups, Holocaust survivors, and ethical watchdogs were outraged by the government's willingness to overlook these scientists' pasts. The revelations about their Nazi connections, which surfaced over the years, fueled public outcry and calls for accountability.
Despite the controversies, the contributions of these scientists were undeniable. Their work accelerated American advancements in rocketry, aerodynamics, and medical research, contributing to the successes of the space program and the military during the Cold War.
It's a classic case of the end justifying the means, but at what cost? The ethical compromises made during Operation Paperclip left a complex legacy, one that included incredible technological progress and a lingering stain on America's moral standing.
Now, let's delve into the resistance and controversy surrounding Operation Paperclip. The decision to bring over German scientists with ties to the Nazi regime was far from universally accepted, and it sparked significant ethical and moral debates.
Right from the start, there was internal resistance within the U.S. government. Many officials in the State Department and the military were deeply uncomfortable with the idea of welcoming former Nazis into America. They argued that it was morally wrong to overlook the war crimes and Nazi affiliations of these scientists.
The State Department, in particular, was vocal about its opposition. They were responsible for issuing visas and had the authority to block the entry of individuals deemed undesirable. On several occasions, they attempted to deny visas to scientists with known Nazi connections.
However, the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, JIOA, often found ways to circumvent these restrictions.
This was a significant point of contention. Many argue that the government was effectively turning a blind eye to the scientists' pasts in exchange for their expertise. This led to fierce debates within the halls of power about the ethical implications of such actions.
Beyond the government, there was also public resistance. As information about Operation Paperclip began to leak, there was growing outrage among the American public. Human rights groups, Holocaust survivors, and Jewish organizations were particularly vocal in their opposition.
These groups argued that it was a betrayal of the values for which the Allies had fought in World War II. They pointed out that many of these scientists had been directly involved in war crimes, including forced labor and human experimentation. Bringing them to America and granting them prestigious positions seemed like a profound injustice.
One of the most notable instances of public resistance came in the late 1940s when journalists and activists started uncovering the truth about these scientists' backgrounds. Newspapers published exposés revealing that many of the recruits had been high-ranking members of the Nazi Party and the SS.
These revelations caused a media firestorm. Headlines screamed about Nazi scientists in America, and the public demanded answers. The government faced intense scrutiny and pressure to justify its actions.
Among the most controversial figures was Arthur Rudolph. He had been the operations director at the Mittelwerk facility, where V2 rockets were produced using forced labor from concentration camps. The conditions were horrific, and thousands of prisoners died due to the brutal working conditions.
Despite this, Rudolph was brought to the U.S. and played a crucial role in the development of the Saturn V rocket, which powered the Apollo missions. When his past was finally revealed in the 1980s, he was forced to renounce his U.S. citizenship and return to Germany, where he faced renewed scrutiny.
Another highly controversial figure was Hubertus Strughold. As we mentioned earlier, he was a pioneer in space medicine, but his involvement in Nazi human experimentation cast a long shadow over his career. Allegations about his wartime activities surfaced periodically, leading to calls for his removal from various honors and positions.
Despite these controversies, many within the government and the scientific community defended Operation Paperclip. They argued that the contributions of these scientists were essential to U.S. national security and technological advancement. The Cold War mentality of the time often prioritized pragmatic considerations over ethical ones.
It's a classic case of realpolitik, where the desire to gain a technological edge over the Soviet Union outweighed moral and ethical considerations. The argument was that the stakes were too high, and the potential benefits too great, to let ethical concerns stand in the way.
This balancing act, between the urgent need for technological superiority and the equally urgent need to uphold ethical standards, defined much of the debate around Operation Paperclip. It's a stark reminder of the complexities and moral ambiguities that often accompany decisions made during times of crisis. Now, let's discuss the lasting impact of Operation Paperclip. The ramifications of this clandestine program extend far beyond the immediate post-war period and continue to influence science, technology, and ethics today.
On the positive side, Operation Paperclip had a significant impact on the U.S. space program. Wernher von Braun and his team were pivotal in developing the rockets that powered the Apollo missions. Their work culminated in the Saturn V rocket, which successfully carried astronauts to the Moon in 1969. This achievement not only marked a major milestone in human space exploration but also solidified the United States' position as a leader in space technology.
Von Braun's contributions didn't stop at Apollo. He and his team were instrumental in the development of the Redstone and Jupiter rockets, which were essential for the U.S. ballistic missile program. These advancements provided the United States with a strategic advantage during the early years of the Cold War, helping to deter Soviet aggression.
Beyond rocketry, Operation Paperclip scientists made significant contributions to various fields of science and technology. Kurt Debus, for example, became the first director of NASA's Kennedy Space Center, overseeing numerous space launches that were critical to the U.S. space program. His leadership helped establish the center as a hub for space exploration.
Another key figure was Hubertus Strughold, whose research in space medicine laid the groundwork for understanding how the human body reacts to the conditions of space travel. Despite his controversial past, Strughold's work helped ensure the safety and health of astronauts, which was crucial for the success of manned space missions.
These technological advancements, however, came at a significant ethical cost. The decision to bring over scientists with Nazi affiliations and to overlook their involvement in war crimes has left a lasting stain on America's moral fabric. The ethical compromises made during Operation Paperclip have sparked ongoing debates about the boundaries of scientific pursuit and the importance of maintaining ethical standards, even in times of national crisis.
The revelations about the scientists' Nazi pasts and their involvement in war crimes have had a profound impact on public trust in government and scientific institutions. When details of their backgrounds became public, it led to widespread outrage and a re-evaluation of how far a nation should go in the pursuit of technological superiority.
This controversy has had a lasting impact on how the scientific community and government agencies approach ethical considerations. The legacy of Operation Paperclip has contributed to the establishment of stricter ethical guidelines and oversight in scientific research, particularly in areas involving human subjects.
Moreover, Operation Paperclip has had a significant impact on U.S.-Soviet relations during the Cold War. The technological advancements achieved through the program gave the United States a competitive edge, intensifying the arms race and the space race. This competition, while fostering rapid technological progress, also heightened tensions between the two superpowers, shaping the geopolitical landscape of the latter half of the 20th century.
On a more human level, the legacy of Operation Paperclip continues to be felt by the families of those who suffered under the Nazi regime. The decision to integrate former Nazi scientists into American society without holding them accountable for their past actions has been a source of pain and controversy for Holocaust survivors and their descendants.
Despite the controversies, the scientific advancements achieved through Operation Paperclip cannot be denied. The program's contributions to space exploration, missile technology, and various other fields have had a profound and lasting impact on the modern world. The success of the Apollo missions, the development of intercontinental ballistic missiles, and advancements in space medicine are just a few examples of the far-reaching effects of this controversial program.
As we reflect on Operation Paperclip, it's essential to recognize the complexities and moral ambiguities that come with such decisions. The program's legacy serves as a reminder of the delicate balance between ethical considerations and the pursuit of scientific and technological progress.
It also highlights the importance of transparency and accountability in government actions. As we continue to push the boundaries of scientific exploration and technological innovation, the lessons of Operation Paperclip remind us to remain vigilant in upholding ethical standards and to ensure that progress is not achieved at the expense of our moral values.
That brings us to the end of today's dive into Operation Paperclip. We hope this exploration has provided an understanding of the operation's lasting impact and the complex legacy it has left behind.
We want to give a special thank you to all our listeners. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and share the History AI podcast. A 5-star review helps us reach more people and continue to grow. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to share it with a friend.
And remember, you can suggest topics for future episodes through our social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
Also, check out our new merchandise available now. The link is in the show notes. Every episode of the History AI podcast is evergreen, so you can listen anytime and still find it relevant.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the History AI podcast.
Bye for now. Looking for the perfect way to show appreciation for the incredible mom in your life? Discover Exhausted Moms, a coloring journey to relaxation and humor, the coloring book that speaks directly to the heart of motherhood. Gift her an escape into pages of laughter, empowerment, and moments of tranquility. With Exhausted Moms, she'll find a blend of whimsical illustrations and inspiring quotes that celebrate her daily triumphs and challenges. Crafted with love from images I created for the mother of my children, each page offers a space for creativity and relaxation, a reminder that she's doing an amazing job, even on the toughest days. Give the gift of laughter, peace, and recognition. Exhausted Moms isn't just a coloring book, it's a hug, a nod of understanding, and a token of appreciation for everything she does. Surprise her with Exhausted Moms today and watch her face light up with joy. Because every mom deserves a moment to herself, wrapped in the colors of love and support.